You ever heard of the Dark Ages?
Yes.
If you go to the Dark Ages of Europe, the reason why the white man called it the Dark Ages is because he was ruling and he was in, or black people was ruling, he was in his low state. He was not ruling. So the King James, the Beethovens, the Constantine, all of the rulers that we think were white people were not white people. That's why they had what's called the Renaissance era, where they would take all the images of the black people and then just paint them white. But if you get a book called like The Russian Icons, it'll tell you, in the book called The Russian Icons, it'll tell you that this is the artwork that survived the whitewashing of the Renaissance era.
Greetings, kings and queens from Africa and across the oceans. I greet you today with love and respect. Without you, there's no Kenyan beast. Now, let me ask you something. And this question is straight out of from my heart. Why is it that whenever they teach us black history, they start with the chains? Why is it that when they teach our history as Africans, they start with colonization? Why is it when they teach history of black people, they start with slavery? Why does our story always begin on plantations, in the belly of the slave ship, or as a victim of colonization? What happened before? This is the question I keep asking myself. And that's why I'm so interested with history. I go back to the history books to see what happened before the ships cruise across the ocean. What was happening before colonization? What happened before all this they teach us? Where are the centuries of greatness, the empires, the inventions, the resistance, the wealth, and the global influence? So my brothers and sisters, the truth is, they cut our story short on purpose. They deliberately erased the most empowering chapters because they knew if we knew that where we came from, we will never accept the chains they put on us. If we knew the truth about our history, their system will fall apart just overnight. But guess what? Today in this video, I'm going to uncover all this. I'm going to uncover the history before the chains. Before we do that, I want to watch these clips here, and then we come back strong with more commentary.
See, originally, Africans did not define themselves by continent, but more by regions. Africa as a continent began to be defined by foreigners. In North Africa, the Romans had a province called Afrique. The word became Africa.
The history, both known and hidden, of the land where time began has been a primary focus of Dr. Clarke's scholarship throughout his long career.
The concept of social order, the concept of an organized society came out of Nile Valley civilization before there was any other society that has been known to man functioning any other place in the world. The significance of Nile Valley civilization is that it was that civilization that set a standard of performance untouched by the other civilizations of the world. And people are reluctant to give an African credit for a creation that happened in Africa. They also forget that the Nile Valley stretches 4,000 miles into the physical body of Africa, and that it was the world's first cultural highway.
For centuries, Eurocentric scholars had rejected the idea that the mighty Egyptian empire was in fact created and maintained by black Africans. The concept that Western civilization was the product of non-white intelligence, imagination, technology, and spirituality was unacceptable, both psychologically and politically. A brilliant Senegalese scholar and scientist would shake, and many say topple, the very foundation of that conventional wisdom. His name was Sheikh Anta Diop. His research was brought to the attention of the English-speaking world through the efforts of his longtime colleague and friend.
I was wondering why his books had never been published in the United States. He said there was no publisher's interest in his books. And so it took me 7 years to interest the publisher in the books of Cheikh Anta Diop.
Diop's disciples refer to him as the Pharaoh of the Upper Nile.
You must be strong enough and serene enough
de voir les faits historiques
to see the historical facts
et de les interpréter
and
correctement.
to interpret them.
Nous pouvons tous être passionnés,
We can all be impassioned,
mais ce n'est pas de cette manière que nous résoudrons les problèmes complexes de l'humanité.
but that is not how we will resolve the very complex
Donc cette
problems of
domination
humanity.
dont nous souffrons, dont j'ai souffert moi-même,
The domination that we suffer from, that I have suffered from
notre
myself,
propre domination des autres races l'a précédé.
our domination of other races preceded it.
Donc l'Afrique a exercé un impérialisme continu pendant 4000 ans.
But for 4,000 years, Black Africa had an imperialism. A
Toute l'Afrique
period of,
occidentale était conquise et était justement sous la domination noire.
all of Western Asia was under the domination of blacks.
On n'aurait pu jamais penser à cette époque-là que la situation pourrait un jour être renversée.
And at that time, no one would ever have dreamt that the situation could be reversed.
C'est pour ça que l'étude de l'histoire nous redonne la sérénité pour
This is-
apprécier les faits et les relativiser.
This is why the study of history gives us the serenity required to appreciate the facts as they are.
1974, he would challenge the major scholars of the world on the concept of Egypt not being anything other than an African state. In the conference on the peopling of Egypt, leading scholars of the world met and debated. Most of them wanted to put Egypt's origin outside of Africa. Cheikh Anta Diop and his protege, Theophile Obenga, placed Egypt within the context of Africa's totality. Cheikh Anta Diop was more than a historian. He's a scientist, he's a paleontologist, and he had proven that if he could get the pigment from some of the mummies, he could prove their African origins. All the rest of the conferees came just to disagree, and when it was all over, they had to admit these two men came prepared to prove their case. At that point, they began to close the door to the research of Cheikh Anta Diop. From the first dynasty to the invasion of Nile Valley, that was the first golden age. And from third dynasty came the great multi-genius Imhotep, the real father of medicine, who lived 1,800 years before the Greek who's called the father of medicine. When we read the biography of the Greek, he says, I am a child of Imhotep. And from the 18th dynasty came the world's great social reformer and maybe one of the world's first deities, Akhenaten. He thought so much of life he would not crush a flower. He outlawed warfare. Spirituality was a part of the total life of the people. Before the coming of the Europeans, the African was very religious. The step pyramid was originally built with a temple at the top where you can go up and pray. This relates not just to the glorification of a pharaoh, but the spiritual outpouring of a people. This is what made the civilization of the Nile so great.
At the same time that Egypt was in its 24th dynasty, Europe was just emerging from its pre-literate past.
The first show of European intelligence was a book called The Odyssey and the Iliad. That's about 850 BC. Where is Egypt 850 BC? Egypt is old and tired and has gone through 24 dynasties. It is on the eve of its last great dynasty that will come from the pharaohs in the south. And the Europeans have just written a book of folklore.
Just south of Egypt lies another highly evolved black society, the Nubians. Their civilization thrived for some 3,000 years.
I call the 25th dynasty the one dynasty from the south that moved up north and to tell their cousins, the Egyptians, how to rule a nation one more time. In the great show of history, this was Africa's last walk in the sun. It was a great and mighty walk. That walk had lasted 10,000 years. Now it's coming to an end. Europe is just being born. The very word Europe is not even being used.
Welcome back. Now, history is not just about the past. History is a weapon. And they have been using this history against us for centuries. Believe me, they have been using our history, our own history, against us. Because colonizers didn't just take our land. They took our memory. They erased our memory. They banned our libraries. They banned our languages, criminalized our culture. They rewrote our past in their own image. So when the French colonized West Africa, for example, they moved African history from school curriculums and replaced it with the European civilization studies. When the British colonized Kenya, when they colonized East Africa and Southern Africa, they portrayed Africans as people with no history before Europeans arrived. As if our story began when they walked in. It's like as if the Portuguese in Angola and the Belgians in Congo, they follow the same pattern as if our history, we were born when colonization started. And this happened because if you control people's history, you control their identity. If you control their identity, then you control their destiny. This is what I call historical welfare. This is what I call historical warfare. The intentional destruction or rewriting of a people's past so that they cannot imagine a future without their oppressors. And make no mistake here, this was not random. It was strategic. Now, ancient African was a powerhouse. We had greatness that was erased. For example, we had Mali Empire, which had this richest man called Mansa Musa. In the 14th century, the richest man in recorded history was a black man, Mansa Musa of Mali. His empire controlled vast gold mines, trade routes, and the legendary University of Timbuktu, and which housed hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on science, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. When Mansa Musa traveled to Mecca in 1324, his wealth was so great that he caused inflation in Egypt by giving away too much gold. Now, ask the average school student today about Mansa Musa. He doesn't know. Ask the Gen Z, just ask any random Gen Z about Mansa Musa. Just ask any random university student from Africa, here from Kenya, about Mansa Musa. He doesn't know about that. And they never heard about his name. We had Kingdom of Kush, the Black Pharaohs. Long before the so-called Egyptian civilization was portrayed as a white or Arab creation, it was ruled by the Kingdom of Kush. Powerful black pharaohs who built pyramids, developed writing systems, and mastered architecture. The Sudanese pyramids still stand tall up to today, outnumbering those in Egypt. But you will never see them in your school history books. No. You will never see the Sudanese pyramids. We had Great Zimbabwe in the southern of Africa. Great Zimbabwe was a city built entirely of stones, with a wall over 30 feet high, constructed without mortar and still standing after 800 years, man. Is that not greatness? Where was this story? Great of Zimbabwe was the center of a thriving trade network dealing in gold, ivory, and kettles. When Europeans discovered it in the 19th century, they refused to believe Africans built it. They claim it must have been Arabs or Phoenicians, because in their worldview, black people couldn't possibly have done it. A lot of history before the white people came. We have the Moors in Europe. Back from 711 to 1492, black Moors ruled part of Spain, Portugal, and southern France. They introduced street lighting, they introduced modern plumbing, irrigation system, advanced mathematics, and libraries containing hundreds of thousands of books. Europe, that time, was in the dark ages. They were still evolving. Yet Africans were bringing light to the world. Ethiopia, here is there. It was never colonized. Ethiopia stands as a symbol of African resistance. While almost every African nation fell into European colonizers, Ethiopia defeated Italy at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. Ethiopia also preserved some of the world's oldest Christian traditions predating European Christianity. So these are just but few examples of how greatness Africa was. These are not just random trivia. They are proof that we have history of leadership, innovation, and civilization that predates and surpasses much of what Europe claims as its own. Now, what we talk about is the erasure of black genius and innovations. Black genius didn't stop in Africa. Even under slavery, segregation, and colonization, our people created, invented, and transformed the world, yet their names were often erased. We have someone like Garrett Morgan, invented the traffic light and the gas mask. Dr. Charles Drew developed the system for blood banks and blood transfusions. We have someone like Madam C.J. Walker. He was invented first self-made female millionaire in America, creating hair care products for black women. We have someone like Benjamin Banneker, mathematicians and astronomer who helped design Washington, D.C. These are just the tip of iceberg. But the erasure goes deeper, because African had mastered astronomy and medicine centuries before Europe came. The Dogon people of Mali knew about the Sirius star system, invisible to the naked eye, long before telescopes even existed. The Swahili coast had thriving shipbuilding industries and traded with China centuries before European contact. So when they tell us that we are behind, remember that we are the blueprint of this world. Remember that. Power is not just built in peace. It is defended in resistance. And back then, we had the global black resistance that they don't teach you. For example, we had Haitian Revolution. Enslaved African in Haiti led the resistance revolution and defeated French, Spanish, and British armies to become the first free black republican in 1804. And the world should have celebrated them, but instead they were punished with a crippling debt to France that lasted over 100 years. In 1831, we had something called Nat Turner. We had someone that was called Nat Turner. He led an uprising in Virginia, striking fear into the heart of the slave system. But the response was different. The response was brutal retaliation and harsh slave laws, because the system feared the courage of the enslaved. We have the Jamaican Maroons, the escaped enslavement Africans, or the escaped enslaved Africans who built free communities in the mountains and fought British forces to a standstill. I came to learn about Jamaican Maroons just recently when I was learning about the history of Jamaica. I came to learn about the Nani of Jamaica, the Maroon Nani, just lately. I came to learn about the Taino people who were the indigenous of Jamaica just lately. They never taught us in school. We had the Zulu resistance. Under King Shaka Zulu, the Zulu nation became one of the most formidable military powers in Africa, defeating European armies in open battle. We have the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. In the 1950s, Kenyan freedom fighters resist British colonial rule despite torture, executions, and all the harsh punishments. These are not just stories. These are blueprints for resilience. And here's the truth. They erase this history because it is dangerous to their system. Because if we know our past, we realize that we are not naturally poor. If we know our past, we realize that we are not naturally inferior, that we are not lucky to get rights. We fought for them. And this knowledge changes everything. It shifts us from begging for inclusion to building our own systems. It moves us, black people, from competing for scraps to creating our own. It breaks the psychological chains, the ones that say that we must rely on white approval to succeed. Black unity, global economic cooperation, reclaiming our media, teaching our children our real history, these are steps to power. And here's my challenge to you. Don't just listen. We have to act as black people. Teach this history to our children, men. Teach it to your fellow. Share this video to your fellow Gen Zs, the youths, and even the old age people who want to listen this. Please, we have to act. Support black business. I say this always. Build community projects. Reconnect with Africa. They erased our history because it is the blueprint of our freedom. Now that we know, they can't stop us. We are the descendants of kings and queens, warriors and scholars, inventors and builders. Our history did not start with chains. It started with crowns. And now, it is time to wear them again. Tell me what you think of the comment section about this video. Tell me what you think about this video. Until next episode, peace out.